Hey guys, tonight we begin not with a battlefield or a royal court, but with something far more treacherous, an elite college campus during homecoming weekend. Because believe it or not, navigating academic rivalries, instant romance, and elaborate deceptions in the hallowed halls of Messina University was somehow even more complicated than decoding someone's 3-word text after your third date. From professors who'd rather argue than admit they're in love to relationships that bloom in 3 days flat, this campus proves that Shakespeare knew exactly what he was talking about, even in 2009 with BlackBerries and Facebook replacing letters and messengers. So before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and nostalgia across the quad of Messina University, one of those elite East Coast institutions where ivy-climbed brick walls and legacies were born. Abond. It was October 2009 and the campus buzzed with an electric energy that only homecoming weekend could generate. Students hurried between Gothic buildings, their backpacks heavy with textbooks, and their minds already drifting toward the weekend's festivities. But this wasn't just any homecoming. This year marked something special. Dean Leonardo Rossetti stood on the steps of Founders Hall, his silver hair catching the afternoon sunlight as he read the email on his BlackBerry for the 3rd time. His daughter, Hero, stood beside him, her dark eyes scanning the same message over his shoulder. She was 23, poised and elegant in a way that came from growing up in academic circles, wearing a fitted blazer over jeans and ballet flats. Her long hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and there was an excitement in her expression that she was trying hard to contain. "They're arriving this evening," Leonardo said, slipping his phone back into his pocket. "Professor Pedro Aragon and his team from the Oxford Exchange Program. 3 years abroad and now they're coming home for the symposium." Hero smiled. "I remember when they left. Ben Montague was so cynical about the whole thing. He said spending 3 years at Oxford studying romantic poetry would turn him into a pretentious bore." Leonardo chuckled. "Benedick Montague is many things, but boring isn't one of them. Though I suspect his cynicism has only deepened with age. 35 and still refusing to settle down, writing those scathing literary reviews that make graduate students weep, and making enemies everywhere he goes," Hero added, though there was affection in her voice. She'd grown up around the university, had known many of these professors and academics since childhood. "I wonder if Beatrice knows he's coming back." At that very moment, across campus in the alumni relations office, Beatrice Leonato was learning exactly that. She sat at her desk, surrounded by color-coded binders and event schedules, her laptop open to 17 different tabs related to homecoming weekend coordination. At 28, Beatrice had returned to her alma mater after a brief stint in corporate event planning in New York, discovering that she preferred the organized chaos of university life to the soulless precision of Manhattan fundraisers. Her assistant, Margaret, stood in the doorway with a printed roster. "You're not going to like this," Margaret said, her voice carrying that specific tone of someone delivering bad news to a friend. Beatrice didn't look up from her computer. "Is it the catering? Please tell me it's not the catering again. I swear if they try to serve those terrible mini quiches." "It's the Oxford contingent. Professor Aragon's team. They've confirmed for the whole weekend." Margaret paused. "Benedick Montague is on the list." Beatrice's fingers froze over her keyboard. For a long moment she didn't move. Then she slowly looked up, her sharp green eyes narrowing. "Benedick Montague. Ben Montague. The same Ben Montague who said, and I quote, 'Beatrice Leonato could coordinate a revolution but couldn't coordinate a genuine emotion if her life depended on it.' That was in his review of the Valentine's Day fundraiser you organized," Margaret said helpfully. "In the campus newspaper, which everyone read." Beatrice stood up, smoothing down her pencil skirt. "The same Ben Montague who spent our entire senior year arguing with me in every seminar, who turned literary analysis into a blood sport, who—" She stopped herself, taking a breath. "It's fine. It's completely fine. He's a professor. I'm an administrator. Our paths probably won't even cross. Margaret raised an eyebrow. He's staying in the presidential guest house, the one right next to your uncle's residence, and you're coordinating the welcome dinner tonight. Beatrice sat back down. Of course I am. The evening descended on Messina University with that particular golden quality that October brings to New England, the kind of light that makes everything look like it belongs in a glossy college brochure. The presidential guest house glowed with warm lamplight from every window, and inside the dining room had been transformed into an elegant welcome dinner setting. White tablecloths, autumn centerpieces of burgundy mums and copper leaves, wine glasses catching the chandelier light like prisms. Beatrice moved through the space with practiced efficiency, adjusting a fork here, straightening a place card there. She wore a deep emerald dress that brought out her eyes, professional yet elegant. Her dark hair fell in loose waves over her shoulders, and though she appeared calm, her cousin Hero could see the tension in her shoulders. "You look beautiful," Hero said, entering the dining room in a soft cream dress that made her look ethereal and nervous. "You're never nervous." "I'm not nervous," Beatrice replied, repositioning a centerpiece for the third time. "I'm strategically anxious. There's a difference. It's just Ben Montague." "Exactly, just Ben Montague. Just the man who wrote a 1,500-word essay about why my organizational skills represent the death of spontaneity in modern academia. Just the person who made it his personal mission to contradict everything I said for 4 years. Beatrice finally stopped fidgeting and turned to Hero. "I'm fine, I'm a professional. I can handle one arrogant literature professor." The front door opened, bringing with it a rush of cool air and the sound of male voices. Dean Leonardo entered first, his face bright with genuine warmth, followed by Professor Pedro Aragon, a distinguished man in his 50s with graying temples and the comfortable tweed jacket that seemed to be the uniform of tenured faculty. Behind them came 3 younger men, and Beatrice felt her breath catch despite herself. Benedick Montague hadn't changed much in 3 years, and yet everything about him seemed different. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that looked deliberately tousled, wearing dark jeans and a charcoal blazer over a white shirt. Academic casual perfected. His face was angular, intelligent, with dark eyes that missed nothing, and a mouth that seemed perpetually on the verge of a sarcastic comment. At 35 he carried himself with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how smart he was and didn't apologize for it. Next to him stood Claudio Vitale, younger at 29, with sandy hair and an open, earnest face. He had the look of someone who still believed in the fundamental goodness of the world, dressed in khakis and a blue button-down that made him look like he'd just stepped out of a J. Crew catalog. Where Benedick was all sharp edges and wit, Claudio was softness and sincerity. The third man was Don John Prince, and something about him immediately set him apart. He was Benedick's half-brother, though they shared little resemblance. Don John was darker, brooding, with a permanent scowl etched into his handsome features. He'd been expelled from Messina 4 years ago for academic dishonesty, a plagiarism scandal that had rocked the English department, and his presence here now felt like a storm cloud at a garden party. But Pedro had advocated for his redemption, had brought him to Oxford as a research assistant, and now here he was, back on the campus that had rejected him. "Leonardo," Pedro embraced the dean warmly. "It's good to be home. Let me introduce the team. You remember Benedick, of course." "Dean Rossetti," Benedick said, shaking his hand with a genuine smile. "The campus looks exactly the same. I find it both comforting and slightly disturbing. And Claudio Vitale, who's just accepted a position in our Renaissance Studies department," Pedro continued. Claudio stepped forward, shaking Leonardo's hand with enthusiasm. "It's an honor, sir. I've read all your work on Elizabethan drama. Your book on Marlowe changed my entire dissertation approach." Leonardo beamed. "You'll fit right in here. And you remember my daughter Hero?" Claudio turned, and the moment his eyes met Hero's, something shifted in the room. It was subtle, the way he went very still, the way his smile softened into something wondering and awed. Hero felt heat rise to her cheeks, her own smile becoming shy, uncertain. The air between them seemed to thicken with an instant undeniable recognition. "Miss Rossetti," Claudio said softly. You probably don't remember, but we met once years ago at a faculty dinner. You were still in high school." I remember, Hero said, her voice barely above a whisper. You were a graduate student. You spilled coffee on Professor Chen's papers and spent 20 minutes apologizing. Claudio laughed, delighted and embarrassed. You remember that? I remember thinking it was sweet, that you cared so much about making it right. Benedick watched this exchange with barely concealed amusement, then his gaze swept the room and landed on Beatrice. For a moment, neither moved. Then, slowly, Benedick's mouth curved into that familiar, infuriating smirk. Beatrice Leonato, he said, his voice carrying across the room like a challenge. Still coordinating things, I see. Tell me, have you scheduled spontaneity into tonight's agenda, or would that be too paradoxical? Beatrice felt every eye in the room turn toward her. She set down the water pitcher she'd been holding with deliberate care, then turned to face Benedick with a smile that could cut glass. Professor Montague, she said, her voice honey-sweet and poisonous. 3 years at Oxford and you return with the same tired observations. I'd hoped the British education system would teach you new material, but I suppose some people are simply too set in their ways to learn. Benedick's eyes gleamed with the thrill of engagement. On the contrary, I've learned a great deal. For instance, I've learned that the British can make even the most mundane administrative tasks seem charming through sheer force of accent. Perhaps you should try that approach, though I suppose natural charm can't be scheduled into existence. And I suppose arrogance needs no cultivation when it grows so naturally, Beatrice countered, moving closer. Tell me, Professor, did Oxford teach you anything useful? Or did you spend 3 years perfecting the art of condescension? I refined it, actually. There's a difference. Pedro cleared his throat loudly, though he was smiling. I see some things never change. Benedick, Beatrice, must you begin before we've even sat down for dinner? We're not beginning, Beatrice said lightly. We're simply acknowledging each other's continued existence. It would be rude not to. How considerate, Benedick murmured. Leonardo, sensing the need for intervention, gestured toward the dining room. Please, everyone, let's sit. Beatrice has organized a wonderful meal, and I'm sure we're all hungry after your journey. The group moved toward the table, and Hero found herself naturally gravitating toward Claudio, who pulled out her chair with old-fashioned courtesy. They sat beside each other, already leaning close in conversation, their voices low and private. Across the table, Benedick somehow ended up directly opposite Beatrice, which she suspected was Pedro's doing. The old professor had always enjoyed watching them argue. Don John took a seat at the far end, his dark eyes surveying the scene with barely concealed contempt. He accepted a glass of wine from Margaret but said nothing, his presence a shadow at the edge of the warm gathering. As the first course was served, a butternut squash soup with sage, the conversation flowed around the table. Pedro regaled them with stories of Oxford, of rain-soaked libraries and punting on the River Cherwell. Claudio spoke passionately about his research on Shakespeare's comedies, his eyes constantly drifting to Hero, who listened with rapt attention. Leonardo discussed the upcoming symposium on love and deception in Renaissance literature, the event that had brought the Oxford team home. It's particularly timely, Leonardo said, breaking bread and buttering it thoughtfully. In our digital age, deception has taken on new forms. Social media, edited photographs, carefully curated identities. The Renaissance understood that appearance and reality were constantly at war. I think we're rediscovering that truth. How cheerful, Beatrice said dryly. Tell me, Professor Montague, do you ever have an optimistic thought, or would that interfere with your carefully maintained cynicism? I prefer to think of it as realism. Some of us choose to see the world as it is rather than how we'd like to coordinate it to be. And some of us choose to actually do something about the world rather than just critique it from comfortable academic positions. Touché, Benedick said, raising his wineglass in mock salute. Hero, sensing the tension escalating, spoke up quickly. Professor Vitale, you mentioned your research on Shakespeare's comedies. What drew you to that particular area? Claudio turned to her gratefully, his entire demeanor softening. The idea of love at first sight, actually. Shakespeare returns to it again and again, Romeo and Juliet, obviously, but also in the comedies. Characters who see each other and just know. It's irrational, impractical, and yet it's presented as the most real and true thing in the world. He paused, his eyes locked on heroes. I used to think it was just a dramatic convention. Now I'm not so sure. The meaning behind his words hung in the air. Hero's cheeks flushed pink, but she didn't look away. And what changed your mind? Evidence, Claudio said softly. Recent evidence. Benedick groaned audibly. Not you too, Claudio. Don't tell me Oxford's turned you into a romantic. Next you'll be writing sonnets and sighing at the moon. Would that be so terrible? Hero asked, a hint of challenge in her usually gentle voice. It would be adolescent, Benedick replied. Love at first sight is a chemical reaction mistaken for destiny. Attraction is biology. Compatibility takes time, observation, rational assessment. How romantic, Beatrice said, her tone mocking. I'm sure the women of Messina are lining up to be rationally assessed by you. I don't assess women for romantic purposes. I've sworn off the entire enterprise. Marriage is an institution designed to trap two people in mutual disappointment. Finally, Beatrice said, raising her own glass, something we agree on. I'd rather die single than tie myself to someone who thinks love can be scheduled and optimized, like everything else in life. Oh, I don't think love can be optimized, Benedick said. I think it's a temporary madness that makes intelligent people stupid, which is why I avoid it entirely. As do I, Beatrice declared. I'd rather have my freedom and my mind intact than lose both to some man who thinks he's doing me a favor by proposing. They stared at each other across the table, and for a moment everyone else seemed to fade away. There was something electric in their opposition, something that made Pedro smile knowingly and Leonardo suppress a chuckle. Only Don John watched without amusement, his dark eyes moving from face to face, calculating something. When his gaze settled on the way Claudio looked at Hero, with such open, vulnerable adoration, his mouth twisted into something cruel. The next morning arrived with the crisp clarity that follows a cold October night. Messina University's campus was alive with homecoming preparations. Students hanging banners from dormitory windows, the grounds crew setting up white tents on the main quad, and the distant sound of the marching band practicing somewhere beyond the library. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from the campus cafe, mixing with the earthy scent of fallen leaves being raked into enormous piles. Claudio walked across the quad with the distracted air of someone whose mind was elsewhere. He wore jeans and a vintage Messina hoodie, his hands shoved in his pockets, but his eyes kept scanning the buildings as if searching for something or someone. Benedick strolled beside him, dressed in black jeans and a leather jacket over a gray Henley, looking more like a brooding indie musician than a literature professor. He was talking as usual, but Claudio was barely listening. And the research facilities are actually quite impressive for a university of this size, Benedick was saying, though I suspect the library's digital archive still uses the same clunky interface from 2006. Some things never change. Claudio, are you hearing anything I'm saying? Yes, absolutely. Digital archive, very important, Claudio said, his eyes still roaming. Benedick stopped walking and turned to face his friend, genuine concern crossing his features. You've been like this since last night. What's wrong with you? You barely touched your breakfast. You've been checking your phone every 30 seconds, and you have this. He gestured at Claudio's face. This dazed expression like you've been hit with a brick. Claudio finally met his eyes. Ben, can I ask you something? Do you believe in destiny? Oh no, Benedick said immediately. No, we're not doing this. It's Hero, Claudio said, the name coming out like a prayer. I can't stop thinking about her. I know we only just met, re-met, but there's something there, Ben, something real. The way she smiled at me last night, the way we talked after dinner about everything and nothing, how the hours just disappeared. It's been 12 hours since you met her properly, Benedick interrupted. 12 hours. You can't make life decisions based on 12 hours of attraction. Romeo and Juliet fell in love in less time. And they both died. They were teenagers. That's not the model you want to follow. Benedick ran his hand through his hair in exasperation. Listen to me, Claudio. You're a brilliant scholar. You're about to start a prestigious position here. Don't complicate it by rushing into some romance with the dean's daughter based on... What? Pretty eyes and good conversation? It's more than that, Claudio insisted, his voice quiet but firm. I know how it sounds, but I've never felt this way before, like I've been half asleep my whole life and suddenly woke up. She's intelligent, kind, thoughtful. Did you hear her talking about the student mentorship program she volunteers for? She cares, Ben. Really cares about making things better. Benedick softened slightly. She does seem genuinely nice, which is exactly why you should take your time. Get to know her properly. Don't rush into declarations of eternal love when you barely know her favorite color. It's blue, Claudio said immediately. Like the morning sky, she told me last night. Benedick stared at him. You're hopeless. I think I might be in love. You're definitely hopeless. But Benedick clapped him on the shoulder with reluctant affection. Fine. If you're determined to pursue this, at least do it properly. Talk to her uncle. Well, her father, the dean. This is an academic institution. There are proprieties, and for God's sake, take it slow. Get to know her before you start picking out china patterns. They resumed walking, passing under ancient oak trees whose leaves rained down in gentle cascades of gold and crimson. Ahead, near the fountain in the center of the quad, they could see a group of people gathered. As they got closer, Benedick recognized Beatrice's voice carrying across the lawn, giving instructions about banner placement with military precision. She stood at the fountain's edge, wearing dark jeans tucked into brown leather boots and a fitted burgundy sweater that somehow managed to look both professional and effortlessly stylish. Her hair was pulled back in a high ponytail, and she held a clipboard in one hand while gesturing with the other. Around her, student volunteers hurried to execute her vision, hanging a massive Welcome Home Messina alumni banner between two light posts. Hero stood nearby, offering suggestions more gently, wearing a cream-colored peacoat and a plaid scarf that fluttered in the breeze. When she saw Claudio approaching, her entire face lit up with a smile so radiant that Benedick actually felt his cynical heart soften a fraction. Professor Vitale, Hero called out, waving, and Professor Montague, good morning. Claudio's response was immediate and almost comical. He straightened up, ran a hand nervously through his hair, and broke into a grin that made him look about 18 years old. Good morning, Miss Rossetti. The campus looks beautiful. You've both done amazing work. That's all Beatrice, Hero said warmly. She's the mastermind behind homecoming. I just assist and try not to get in the way. Beatrice finally looked up from her clipboard, and her eyes locked immediately on Benedick. Professor Montague, how kind of you to grace us with your presence. Are you here to critique our banner placement, or do you have actual business on the quad? Can't I simply enjoy the autumn morning? Benedick replied, moving closer. Though now that you mention it, that banner is slightly crooked. The left side is about 2 inches lower than the right. Beatrice's eyes narrowed. She turned to look at the banner, which was, infuriatingly, exactly as he described. It's meant to be casual, organic. It's meant to be level. There's a difference. Some of us appreciate aesthetic imperfection. It suggests humanity, warmth, authenticity, qualities you might not be familiar with. Oh, I'm familiar with imperfection. I'm looking at a prime example. Hero gasped softly, but there was a smile playing at her lips. Claudio looked between them with growing alarm, as if watching two master fencers about to draw blood. Beatrice, Hero said gently, touching her cousin's arm. Maybe we should... No, it's fine, Beatrice said, never breaking eye contact with Benedick. The professor and I understand each other perfectly. We speak the same language, fluent sarcasm with a dialect of mutual disdain. At least we're honest about it, Benedick said. Better than those who pretend politeness while seething underneath. Oh, I'm not seething. Seething would require caring about your opinion, which would require me to take you seriously, which I categorically do not. The lady protests too much. The professor presumes too much. They stood there, locked in their verbal combat, and something strange happened. The students working around them had stopped to watch, sensing the crackle of electricity in the air. But it wasn't hostile electricity. Not entirely. There was something else woven through it, something neither Benedick nor Beatrice seemed aware of, but that was obvious to everyone watching. the way they leaned toward each other despite their words, the way Benedick's eyes lit up with genuine engagement, losing that bored, cynical cast they normally held, the way Beatrice's cheeks were flushed with color and life. Claudio noticed it. Hero definitely noticed it, glancing at her cousin with thoughtful curiosity. And watching from a bench near the Humanities building, Don John noticed it too, his expression dark and calculating. "Perhaps," Hero said diplomatically, "we should all take a break. There's a coffee cart by the library. Claudio, would you walk with me? I'd love to hear more about your research." "I'd be honored," Claudio said immediately, offering his arm with endearing formality. Hero took it, and they began walking away, already deep in conversation, their heads bent close together. Benedick and Beatrice were left facing each other, the absence of their audience somehow making the space between them feel more intimate and more dangerous. "Your cousin seems taken with Claudio," Benedick observed, his tone softer now, almost conversational. "He seems equally taken with her," Beatrice replied, also gentling. "I hope he's serious. Hero's not someone who plays games. She's genuine, and she deserves someone who'll treat her that way. Claudio is many things, but he's not a game player. If he's interested in your cousin, his intentions are honorable. Probably too honorable. He's already talking about love and destiny and all that romantic nonsense." Beatrice's expression shifted to concern. "They just met. That's exactly what I told him. But he's convinced it's fate or some such foolishness." Benedick shook his head. "I worry about him. He's a brilliant scholar but naive about people. He sees the world as he wishes it were, not as it is." "And you see it as worse than it is," Beatrice said quietly. "That's equally dangerous." Their eyes met, and for a moment the antagonism dropped away, revealing something rawer underneath. Understanding, perhaps. Recognition of kindred spirits, even if they'd never admit it. The moment broke when Benedick's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and grimaced. "Pedro wants me at a department meeting. The joys of academic life. Endless meetings about meetings. And I have 17 more items on my homecoming checklist," Beatrice said, consulting her clipboard, "including fixing that banner you so helpfully pointed out. It really is crooked. Goodbye, Professor Montague. Until we meet again, Miss Leonato. I'm sure it will be equally delightful." He walked away, and Beatrice watched him go despite herself, noting the way he moved with casual confidence, the way other students seemed to gravitate towards him even though he projected such cynicism. She shook her head, annoyed at herself for noticing. "He's wrong about everything," she muttered to herself. "Is he, though?" Margaret appeared at her elbow, having witnessed the entire exchange. "Because from where I was standing, you two looked like you were enjoying yourselves. We were arguing. You were engaged. I've never seen you more alive than when you're sparring with him. That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Margaret smiled knowingly. "When's the last time anyone challenged you the way he does? When's the last time you actually had to work to win an argument?" Beatrice opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. She looked down at her clipboard, suddenly unable to meet her assistant's eyes. "It doesn't matter. Benedick Montague and I are oil and water. We always have been." "Oil and water don't generate sparks," Margaret observed. "You two, that's flint and steel." Across the quad, in the shadows of the Humanities building, Don John pulled out his own phone. He scrolled through the faculty directory until he found what he was looking for, Claudio Vitale's profile, complete with his new office assignment and schedule. Then he found Hero Rossetti's information, dean's daughter, volunteer coordinator, schedule of classes showing she taught a weekly arts workshop for underprivileged youth every Thursday evening at the campus community center. His companion, Baraccio, a former graduate student who'd been expelled alongside Don John and now worked as his assistant, leaned over his shoulder. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," Don John said slowly, "that young Professor Vitale is about to have his heart broken. And in the process, we're going to remind this university exactly why they should have never let us back through their gates." That evening, in the warm study of Dean Leonardo's residence, an elegant Victorian house on the edge of campus, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a fireplace crackling with orange flames, Pedro and Leonardo sat in leather armchairs, each nursing a glass of bourbon. The room smelled of old books, wood smoke, and the faint vanilla notes of expensive whiskey. Rain had begun to fall outside, pattering against the tall windows, creating a cozy cocoon of warmth and conspiracy. "Did you see them today?" Pedro asked, swirling his glass thoughtfully. "Benedick and Beatrice at the fountain?" Leonardo chuckled. "I heard about it from at least 5 different sources. Apparently their argument stopped foot traffic. Students were filming it on their phones." "Of course they were. This generation documents everything." Pedro set down his glass and leaned forward, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "But here's what strikes me, my friend. Those two have been dancing around each other for years. The arguing, the constant verbal sparring, it's not animosity, it's engagement of the deepest kind." "I've often thought the same," Leonardo admitted. "When Beatrice talks about him, even when she's criticizing him, there's an energy there, a passion. She doesn't waste that kind of ammunition on people she doesn't care about." "And Benedick, I've known him since he was an undergraduate. Brilliant, yes, but emotionally distant. Afraid of connection, I think, though he'd never admit it. He hides behind cynicism and wit, keeping everyone at arm's length." Pedro paused, watching the fire. "Except with Beatrice. With her he's fully present, alive in a way I rarely see." "So what do we do about it?" Pedro smiled slowly. "We help them see what everyone else already sees. A little strategic intervention. Some carefully placed information that each of them overhears about the other's secret feelings. You want to trick them into falling in love? I want to trick them into admitting what's already there. There's a difference." Pedro stood and walked to the window, watching the rain. Benedick needs to believe that Beatrice has feelings for him but is too proud to show it. And Beatrice needs to believe the same of him. Once they think the other is vulnerable, their defenses will crumble. Leonardo considered this, then nodded slowly. "It could work, though we'll need help. Hero, certainly. She knows Beatrice better than anyone. And Claudio can work on Benedick. The boy is so love-drunk himself right now that he'll believe anything romantic is possible." Pedro turned back from the window. "Speaking of which, how do you feel about Claudio's obvious interest in your daughter?" Leonardo's expression softened immediately. "Hero came to me this afternoon. She was practically glowing. She says she's never felt this way before. This immediate connection, this sense of recognition. It's moving quickly, but..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've watched her grow up, Pedro. She's always been careful, thoughtful, measured. If she feels this strongly about Claudio, I trust her judgment. He's a good man, honorable, intelligent, kind. He'll treat her well. Then I give them my blessing, should it come to that." Leonardo raised his glass. "To young love and old schemers." Pedro laughed and clinked his glass against Leonardo's. "To meddling in the service of happiness." They drank, the firelight casting dancing shadows across the book-lined walls, neither of them aware that outside, in the rain-soaked darkness, a figure stood watching the warm glow of the study window. Don John had followed Pedro here after dinner, curious about what the professors were planning. He couldn't hear their words through the glass, but he could see their conspiratorial smiles, their raised glasses, the easy friendship between them. Whatever they were planning, it reeked of happiness and hope, 2 things Don John had learned to despise during his years of exile and humiliation. This university had destroyed him once, had taken everything from him because of one mistake, one moment of weakness, when he'd copied passages from an obscure source for a paper he'd been too drunk and desperate to write himself. They'd given him no second chances, no mercy. They'd simply erased him, as if 4 years of his life meant nothing. Now he was back, tolerated but not welcomed, a ghost at the feast of their comfortable academic lives. Pedro's charity had brought him here, but it was a poisoned gift, forcing him to smile and bow to the same people who'd cast him out, to watch others succeed where he'd failed. But he could burn it all down, starting with the romance blossoming between Claudio and Hero. If he could destroy that, show Claudio that his perfect love was nothing but an illusion, prove that even the dean's innocent daughter could be corrupted or appear to be, then maybe these smug academics would finally understand what it felt like to lose everything. The rain fell harder, soaking through Don John's jacket, but he didn't move. He stood there in the darkness, watching the warm light, planning his revenge with the patience of someone who had nothing left to lose. Inside, unaware of the malevolence taking shape beyond their window, Pedro and Leonardo continued their good-natured plotting, genuinely believing that a little deception in service of love was a harmless, even noble thing. They had no idea that deception, once unleashed, has a way of taking on a life of its own. Saturday afternoon brought the kind of perfect autumn weather that made New England famous. Brilliant blue skies, air crisp enough to sting the lungs, leaves blazing in their final glory before winter's arrival. The homecoming game was scheduled for 3 o'clock, but the campus had been buzzing since morning with tailgating parties, alumni reunions, and the electric anticipation that comes with tradition and nostalgia. Benedick found himself wandering the botanical gardens behind the library, a quiet oasis away from the crowds. The gardens were mostly empty this time of year, the summer flowers gone but the autumn plantings still holding on, chrysanthemums in deep purples and golds, ornamental grasses swaying in the breeze, the last defiant roses clinging to their bushes. He sat on a stone bench near the reflection pond, ostensibly grading papers on his laptop, but mostly just thinking. His thoughts, annoyingly, kept returning to Beatrice, the way she'd looked yesterday at the fountain, wind pulling strands of hair loose from her ponytail, cheeks flushed with the thrill of their argument, the sharp intelligence in her green eyes, the way she gave as good as she got, never backing down, never intimidated by his reputation or his rhetoric. It was refreshing and frustrating in equal measure. He was so lost in thought that he didn't notice Pedro, Leonardo, and Claudio approaching until they were quite close. They seemed deep in conversation, speaking just loud enough to be heard, but with the air of people who believed they were alone. Benedick looked up, about to call out to them, but something in their tone made him pause. Instead, he quietly closed his laptop and remained still on his bench, partially hidden by a large ornamental grass that had grown wild and tall. "I still can't quite believe it," Pedro was saying, shaking his head with wonder. Beatrice Leonato, of all people, in love, and with Benedick no less. Benedick froze, every muscle in his body going rigid. "Hero told me in absolute confidence," Leonardo said, his voice carrying concern. "Apparently Beatrice has been struggling with it for years. Since they were undergraduates together, she's felt this connection. But she's terrified of being vulnerable, of giving him that power over her. It's eating her alive," Claudio added, and he sounded genuinely distressed. "Hero says she barely sleeps anymore. She writes these long journal entries about him, analyzing every conversation they've had, trying to logic away her feelings. But emotions don't respond to logic, do they?" "They certainly don't," Pedro agreed. "The poor woman. And she's convinced herself that Benedick despises her, that all his arguing is genuine contempt rather than what it actually is." "Which is what?" Leonardo asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "Engagement, interest, the behavior of a man who's found his intellectual equal and doesn't quite know what to do about it." Pedro sighed heavily. If only Benedick could see it. But he's so wrapped up in his cynicism, his certainty that love is foolish and marriage is a trap, that he'd never consider. "He'd mock her," Claudio interjected, sounding protective. "If he knew how she felt, he'd probably make some cutting remark about it. Write one of his cruel reviews about the absurdity of an organized woman like Beatrice having disorganized emotions. It would destroy her." Behind his concealing grasp, Benedick felt something crack open in his chest. Beatrice? In love with him? Writing journal entries about their conversations? The idea seemed impossible, and yet he thought of the way she looked at him sometimes when she thought he wasn't paying attention. The energy between them, the way they sought each other out even as they pretended not to. Could it be possible? "Hero begged me not to say anything," Leonardo continued. "And we won't, of course. It wouldn't be fair to Beatrice. She's too proud to ever admit it, and frankly, given Benedick's stated views on love and marriage, she's probably right to keep silent. Better to suffer in private than to be publicly humiliated." "It's a tragedy, really," Pedro said softly. "Two brilliant people, perfect for each other in every way that matters, kept apart by pride and fear and stubbornness. If circumstances were different, if Benedick were capable of taking his own advice about rational assessment and actually see what's in front of him. But he won't, Claudio said firmly, and we can't force him. Some people are just determined to be miserable, I suppose. They began walking away, their voices fading into the distance, leaving Benedick alone in the garden with his shattered worldview scattered around him like fallen leaves. Benedick sat motionless for a long time after they'd gone, staring at the reflection pond without really seeing it. His mind was racing, reassembling everything he thought he knew about Beatrice, about their relationship, about himself. Beatrice Leonato was in love with him, the woman who'd called him pretentious, arrogant, and emotionally stunted. The woman who'd once told him that she'd rather date her stapler than suffer through dinner with him. That same woman lay awake at night, thinking about him, writing about him, suffering because of feelings she couldn't control. And the most disturbing realization of all, he wasn't horrified by this information. He was relieved, elated even. Something warm and unfamiliar was spreading through his chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. He stood up abruptly, began pacing along the pond's edge. "This is insane," he muttered to himself. "I've spent years perfecting my independence. I've written essays about the foolishness of romantic attachment. I've mocked Claudio for falling in love in 12 hours, and now I'm—" He stopped, ran his hands through his hair. "Now I'm what? Reconsidering my entire philosophy because of overheard gossip." But it wasn't just gossip. It made too much sense. The way Beatrice argued with him, not to wound, but to engage. The way she remembered every conversation they'd had, could quote things he'd said years ago. The way her eyes lit up when she saw him, even as her mouth prepared a cutting remark. "She's brilliant," he said aloud, as if hearing himself say it would make it less true. "She's organized and passionate and absolutely infuriating in the best possible way. She makes me think harder, argue better, be sharper than I am with anyone else." He paused. "Oh God, I'm in love with Beatrice Leonato." The admission hung in the autumn air, and instead of feeling trapped or panicked, Benedick felt suddenly, inexplicably free. The cynicism he'd wrapped around himself like armor for so many years. What if it had just been protection? A way to avoid the vulnerability of actually caring about someone who could hurt him? But Beatrice could hurt him. Was hurting, according to what he'd just heard, hurting herself, trying to hide her feelings. And if she was brave enough to feel something despite her pride and independence, wasn't he obligated to be equally brave? "I need to do something," he said decisively. "Something that shows her. But what? I can't just walk up and confess my feelings based on eavesdropping. She'd think I was mocking her." He resumed pacing. "I need to be subtle, gentle. Show her that I've changed, that I see her differently, that I'm capable of—" "Talking to yourself, Professor Montague?" Benedick spun around to find Margaret standing on the garden path, smiling with barely suppressed amusement. "That's either the sign of genius or madness. I'll let you decide which." "Margaret, I was just thinking aloud, working through a complex literary problem. Is that what we're calling Beatrice now? A complex literary problem?" She laughed at his expression. "The gardens have excellent acoustics. I heard at least the last minute of your monologue. Don't worry, your secret's safe with me." Benedick looked at her carefully. "You're her friend, her assistant. Tell me honestly, does she really feel something for you?" "Oh, Professor, she's felt something for you since junior year. The question isn't whether she cares, it's whether you're going to be brave enough to deserve that caring." Margaret's expression turned serious. "Beatrice doesn't let people in easily. She's been hurt before. And she's learned to protect herself with wit and competence and emotional distance. If you're going to pursue this, you need to be absolutely certain, because if you hurt her, I will personally make sure your life at this university is a living hell." "Noted," Benedick said, oddly touched by the fierce loyalty, "and appreciated. But I am certain. I just realized it, but I think maybe I've been certain for a while. I just didn't let myself see it." Margaret nodded approvingly. "Then maybe there's hope for you after all. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a similar mission across campus. Hero and I have a certain stubborn woman to educate about her own feelings." She walked away, leaving Benedick alone again with his revelation and his racing heart. He looked down at his laptop, at the papers he was supposed to be grading, and laughed. How could he possibly focus on freshman essays about metaphor when his entire understanding of himself had just been fundamentally altered? Across campus in the alumni relations office, Beatrice sat at her desk drowning in spreadsheets and seating charts for tonight's homecoming gala. She'd been working for hours, fueled by black coffee and determination, trying not to think about Benedick Montague and failing spectacularly at that goal. Her office door was slightly ajar, and through it she could hear voices in the hallway outside. Hero and Margaret speaking in what they probably thought were hushed tones, but which carried clearly into Beatrice's space. "I feel terrible keeping this from her," Hero was saying. "Beatrice deserves to know." "Know what?" Margaret replied. "That Professor Montague has been in love with her for years, but is too proud and afraid to admit it." Beatrice's hand froze over her keyboard, her heart suddenly pounding so hard she was sure they could hear it from the hallway. "Don't be dramatic," Hero said gently. "He's not in love with her. That's too strong a word. He's interested, intrigued. According to Claudio, Benedick talks about her constantly, quotes things she said, analyzes her arguments, even defends her when other faculty members criticize her event planning. That's basically love for someone like Benedick Montague," Margaret countered. "The man who swore off relationships, who writes cynical essays about the death of romance, spends half his time thinking about the one woman who challenges him. But he'd never tell her. His pride won't allow it." Beatrice sat perfectly still, barely breathing, every sense focused on the conversation happening just beyond her door. "It's sad, really," Hero continued, her voice soft with genuine sympathy. "Claudio says Benedick looked almost haunted yesterday after they argued at the fountain. Like he wanted to say something real, but couldn't get past their usual pattern of bickering. And Beatrice..." Hero paused, her voice dropping even lower. "I've known my cousin my entire life. I've never seen her as alive as she is when she's around him. But she's convinced herself he's the enemy, that their arguing means incompatibility rather than perfect compatibility. Two stubborn, brilliant people circling each other for years, both too proud to admit what everyone else can see plainly," Margaret said. "It's like watching a Shakespearean comedy except nobody's doing anything about it." "Maybe we should tell her," Hero suggested. "Maybe if she knew..." "No," Margaret said firmly. "Beatrice would never forgive us for interfering, and she'd never believe it anyway. She'd think we were playing some cruel joke, or that Benedick was mocking her through us. The only way this works is if she figures it out herself, or if circumstances force them together in a way they can't avoid," Hero added thoughtfully. "Some situation where they have to be honest with each other." Their voices faded as they moved down the hallway, leaving Beatrice alone with information that felt like it was rewriting her entire reality. She stared at her computer screen, the spreadsheet blurring into meaningless numbers and cells. Benedick Montague, in love with her, or interested, intrigued. Whatever semantics Hero wanted to use, the man she'd spent years arguing with, the man whose opinions she valued more than almost anyone else's, even when she disagreed with them. The man who made her feel sharp and clever and fully herself. That man thought about her when she wasn't there. "This is ridiculous," she whispered to her empty office. "I don't even like him. He's arrogant and cynical and impossible." But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie she'd been telling herself for self-protection. The truth was more complicated and more frightening. She'd been half in love with Benedick Montague since the day he demolished her entire argument in a senior seminar, and then bought her coffee afterward to apologize for being too harsh. She'd loved the way his mind worked, the way he pushed her to think harder, the way he never treated her like she was fragile or needed protecting. But she'd assumed the feeling was one-sided, had convinced herself that their arguing was genuine hostility rather than the most honest communication she'd ever experienced with anyone. "What do I do with this?" she asked the empty room. No answer came, but slowly a smile began to spread across her face, tentative at first, then growing stronger. Maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to be alone in her stubbornness. Maybe there was someone equally stubborn waiting for her to make the first move, or at least to meet him halfway. Meanwhile, in the student center coffee shop, Claudio and Hero sat at a corner table, their hands intertwined on the surface between their cups, talking with the intensity of people discovering each other. 3 days. They'd known each other, really known each other, for 3 days. And yet Claudio already couldn't imagine his life without her in it. "My father wants to meet you officially," Hero said, her thumb tracing patterns on his palm. "For dinner tomorrow night. He's being very formal about it, which means he's taking this seriously." "Is he protective?" Claudio asked, suddenly nervous. "Incredibly, but he likes you already. He told me last night that you have integrity, that he can see it in how you talk about your research and your students." Hero smiled. I think his exact words were, "That young man has character." "I don't want to rush you," Claudio said carefully. "I know this is fast, but Hero, I need you to know this isn't casual for me. You're not casual for me. When I look at you, I see my future, and that should terrify me, but it doesn't. It feels like the most natural thing in the world." Hero's eyes glistened with emotion. "It feels that way to me too. Like I've been waiting without knowing I was waiting, and suddenly here you are." They were so absorbed in each other that they didn't notice Don John watching them from across the coffee shop, his expression dark with calculation. Next to him, Baraccio scrolled through his phone, pulling up the calendar app. "The gala is tonight," Baraccio said quietly. "Everyone will be there. It's the perfect time." "Not tonight," Don John said slowly. "Tonight, let them be happy. Let Claudio bask in his perfect romance. Let him get comfortable in his certainty." His smile was cruel. "Tomorrow night, we'll arrange for Claudio to see something that will destroy everything he believes about his innocent Hero. And by Monday morning, this entire campus will know that the dean's perfect daughter isn't what she appears to be." Sunday evening settled over Messina University with an unseasonable warmth, the kind of false spring that October sometimes offers before winter arrives in earnest. The homecoming gala had been a triumph the night before, Beatrice's meticulous planning paying off in an event that would be talked about for years. But tonight was different, quieter. The symposium on Renaissance literature would begin tomorrow, and the campus had an expectant, breath-held quality. Claudio walked through the darkened quad toward the library, his phone pressed to his ear, listening to a voicemail from Don John. The message had been cryptic, urgent. "Meet me at the west entrance of the library at 9 p.m. It's about Hero. Something you need to see before tomorrow. Trust me, you'll want to know this." Something cold had settled in Claudio's stomach when he'd heard it, but he told himself he was being paranoid. Don John had been making an effort all weekend, had even apologized for his past behavior, speaking about redemption and second chances. Still, there was something in his voice on the recording that made Claudio uneasy. The library loomed before him, its Gothic architecture turned sinister in the shadows. The west entrance was rarely used, facing the maintenance buildings and loading docks rather than the main campus. Claudio found Don John waiting there, leaning against the stone wall, smoking a cigarette despite the campus-wide ban on tobacco. "You came," Don John said, exhaling smoke into the night air. "Good. I wasn't sure you would. Your message said it was about Hero. What's going on?" Don John took another drag, seeming to consider his words carefully. "This is difficult for me. You've been kind to me this weekend, kinder than most, but I can't in good conscience let you walk into tomorrow's dinner with the dean without knowing the truth about his daughter." Claudio's hands clenched into fists. "What truth? What are you talking about? See for yourself." Don John pointed toward the back of the library where a service door stood slightly ajar, warm light spilling from within. "Third floor, study room 304. That's where she is right now. With him." "With who?" "Don John, if this is some kind of—" "Just look," Don John interrupted, his voice hard. "Then decide for yourself if I'm lying." Claudio stared at him for a long moment, then turned and strode toward the entrance. His heart was pounding, his mind spinning with denials. This was nonsense. Hero was faithful, honest, incapable of deception. Don John was manipulating him, trying to sabotage his happiness out of bitterness and spite. But his feet kept moving, carrying him through the service entrance, up the back stairwell that maintenance used, emerging on the third floor in the dimly lit corridor of study rooms. Room 304 was at the far end, and through its window he could see movement, shadows cast by the desk lamp within. Claudio approached slowly, his breath coming shallow and fast. Through the narrow window in the door he could see into the small study room. There was Hero. He'd recognize her anywhere. The cream sweater she'd worn today, her dark hair falling loose around her shoulders. Sitting on the desk, leaning close to someone. A man, his back to the door, wearing a dark jacket. Their heads were bent together, intimate, close enough that their foreheads were almost touching. As Claudio watched, frozen in horror, the man's hand came up to cup Hero's face, his thumb stroking her cheek in a gesture that spoke of familiarity, of practiced affection. Hero's eyes were closed, her expression soft, yielding, the world tilted sideways. Claudio gripped the doorframe to steady himself, bile rising in his throat. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be Hero. Except it was. He could see her clearly, could see the way she leaned into the man's touch, could see the obvious intimacy between them. Behind him, Don John had followed up the stairs, staying in the shadows. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said, his voice carrying just the right note of sympathetic regret. "Baraccio told me he'd seen them together before, but I didn't want to believe it. The dean's daughter, carrying on with a graduate student. But there it is." "Who is he?" Claudio's voice came out strangled, barely recognizable as his own. "Does it matter? She's been lying to you, playing you for a fool while she continues her affair. All that talk of connection and destiny, she's good at making men believe what she wants them to believe." Claudio couldn't look away from the window. As he watched, the man leaned closer, and Hero's arms came up around his neck. The embrace was tender, familiar. Everything that Claudio had thought was reserved only for him. Something shattered inside his chest, sharp and final as breaking glass. He'd been such a fool, rushing in with declarations of love and destiny, talking about future and forever, while all along she'd been playing him. The innocent act, the shy smiles, the careful questions about his research and his dreams, all of it calculated manipulation. "The symposium dinner is tomorrow night," Don John said quietly. "Are you really going to sit there and toast her in front of the entire faculty, knowing what you know?" Claudio turned away from the window, his face a mask of barely controlled rage and anguish. "No," he said, his voice cold and hard. "No, I'm not." Monday evening arrived with cruel swiftness. The symposium had opened that morning with keynote speeches and panel discussions, the kind of academic pageantry that Messina University excelled at. But the true centerpiece was the evening dinner in the faculty club, a formal affair where Dean Leonardo would officially announce his blessing of Claudio and Hero's relationship, a public acknowledgement that carried weight in the academic community. The faculty club's dining room glowed with candlelight and understated elegance. Round tables covered in white linens, arrangements of deep red roses, the gentle clink of crystal and silverware. Faculty members in suits and cocktail dresses mingled with wine glasses, discussing papers and theories, with the animated enthusiasm of people who loved their work. Hero arrived with her father, radiant in a navy blue dress that made her look sophisticated beyond her 23 years. She'd spent the afternoon getting ready, her heart full of nervous excitement. Claudio had been distant since yesterday. She'd texted him several times without response, but she told herself he was probably just busy with symposium preparations. Beatrice stood near the bar, elegant in a black dress with emerald earrings that caught the light, watching her cousin with concern. Something felt off, though she couldn't articulate exactly what. The air had a heavy, expectant quality, like the pressure before a thunderstorm. Benedick appeared at her elbow, looking unusually serious in a dark suit. Since the garden revelation, they'd been circling each other differently, less hostile, more uncertain, testing new ground. "Have you seen Claudio?" he asked quietly. "No. Have you?" "Not since yesterday afternoon. He missed the morning panels, which isn't like him." Benedick frowned. "When I called, he said he'd be here tonight but needed time to think. He sounded Strange. Before Beatrice could respond, the room's energy shifted. Claudio had entered, and something about him made conversations falter and die. He was immaculately dressed in a charcoal suit, but his face was a stone mask, his eyes hard and cold. Behind him came Don John, wearing an expression of false sympathy. Hero saw him, and her entire face lit up with joy and relief. She moved toward him through the crowd, her hand extended. "Claudio, I was so worried. I tried to reach you all day." "Don't," Claudio said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Don't pretend. Not here. Not in front of everyone." Hero stopped, confusion replacing her smile. "Pretend? I don't understand. What's wrong?" Leonardo stepped forward, his expression concerned. "Claudio, what's the meaning of this? We're here to celebrate." "Celebrate what?" Claudio's laugh was bitter, sharp-edged. "A lie? A performance? Tell me, Dean Rossetti, were you aware of your daughter's extracurricular activities? Or has she been deceiving you as thoroughly as she's been deceiving me?" The room went completely silent. Beatrice moved closer to Hero instinctively, protective, while Benedick's hand found Claudio's shoulder in warning. "Claudio, whatever you think you know." "I don't think I know." Claudio shook off Benedick's hand and turned his cold gaze fully on Hero, who had gone pale, her hand at her throat. "I saw you last night in the library, study room 304, with him." Hero's confusion deepened. "The library? I wasn't at the library last night. I was home with my father. We had dinner, watched a movie." "Don't lie." Claudio's voice cracked with anguish, breaking through his anger. "I stood outside that room and watched you. Watched him touch your face. Watched you embrace him like—" He stopped, unable to continue. "Claudio, I swear to you, I wasn't there. I don't know what you think you saw, but it wasn't me. It couldn't have been me." Hero's voice was shaking, tears beginning to stream down her face. "Please, you have to believe me." "I believe my own eyes," Claudio said, each word precise and devastating. "I believe what I saw with perfect clarity. You in a cream sweater with your hair down, in the arms of another man, intimate, familiar. Everything you pretended to be with me, you already were with him." Leonardo's face had gone from concerned to furious. "That's enough. Claudio, I don't know what game you're playing, but my daughter was with me last night from 6 p.m. until midnight. We ordered Chinese food, watched The Shawshank Redemption, and she fell asleep on the couch during the credits. Whatever you think you saw. Are you calling me a liar?" Claudio turned on the dean, his control fracturing. "Or are you so blinded by paternal devotion that you can't see what your daughter really is?" Hero made a small, wounded sound, and suddenly her legs wouldn't hold her. She collapsed, would have fallen if Beatrice hadn't caught her, lowering her carefully to the floor. "Hero, someone call campus security, get a doctor." "Don't bother with the dramatics," Claudio said coldly, though his hands were shaking. "She's fine, just adding performance to her list of talents." Benedick stepped fully between Claudio and the women, his voice dangerously quiet. "That's enough. You're my friend, but if you say one more word about her right now, I'll forget that friendship." The room had erupted into chaos. Faculty members were shouting, some defending Hero, others demanding explanations. Don John stood in the corner, his face carefully arranged in an expression of regretful vindication, while Borachio had conveniently disappeared. Pedro pushed through the crowd, his face flushed with anger and confusion. "Claudio, I've known you for 3 years. You're not a cruel man. Whatever you saw, there must be an explanation." "The explanation is that I was a fool," Claudio said, his voice breaking despite his attempts at control. "A romantic fool who believed in destiny and love at first sight, and all the ridiculous fairy tales I should have known better than to trust." He looked down at Hero, who was conscious but barely, her face white as paper, Beatrice cradling her head. For just a moment his expression softened with anguish. Then it hardened again. "I'm sorry you had to see this, all of you. But better you know the truth now than discover it later." He turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Don John followed after a carefully timed pause. throwing one last look of false sympathy toward Hero's crumpled form. Benedick knelt beside Beatrice and Hero, checking the younger woman's pulse. Her heartbeat is rapid. She's in shock. We need to get her out of here, somewhere quiet. My office, Leonardo said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage and fear. It's just across the hall. Together, Benedick and Beatrice helped Hero to her feet, supporting her between them as Leonardo cleared a path through the crowd. They made their way to the dean's private office, a smaller, warmer space than the grand dining room, with leather furniture and walls lined with books. Beatrice settled Hero on the couch while Leonardo grabbed a blanket from his closet, tucking it around his daughter with trembling hands. "I don't understand," Hero whispered, tears streaming silently down her face. "I wasn't there. I wasn't at the library. How could he think? Why would he believe—" "Shh," Beatrice soothed, stroking her cousin's hair. "Don't try to talk, just breathe." Leonardo sank into his desk chair, his face in his hands. "This is a nightmare. In front of the entire faculty, the symposium guests, the humiliation, the accusations." "The humiliation?" Beatrice's voice was sharp as she turned on her uncle. "Hero is the victim here. Someone set this up, orchestrated it to destroy her. The humiliation is that we're even discussing her reputation when she's done nothing wrong." "But what did Claudio see?" Pedro asked, pacing the office with agitation. "He's not delusional. He's a careful observer, trained in close reading and analysis. If he says he saw Hero, then he saw someone who looked like Hero," Benedick said firmly. He'd been standing by the window, staring out at the dark campus, but now he turned back to face them. "A setup. It's the only explanation that makes sense." "But who would do such a thing?" Leonardo demanded. Benedick and Beatrice's eyes met, and in that moment understanding passed between them. "Don John," they said in unison. "He was expelled for deception once before," Beatrice continued, her mind racing. "Academic fraud, fabricating sources. This is exactly his style. Elaborate, cruel, calculated to cause maximum damage." "But how?" Pedro asked. "If Hero was home with her father, who was in that study room? And how did they look enough like Hero to fool Claudio?" "A wig, similar clothing," Benedick said, thinking it through. "The lighting in those back study rooms is terrible. Just a desk lamp." Claudio saw what he expected to see, what Don John primed him to see. And from outside, through that narrow window, with his emotions already activated by Don John's suggestions. "It's not enough," Leonardo said heavily. "We can theorize all we want, but without proof the damage is done. By tomorrow morning everyone will have heard some version of tonight's events. Hero's reputation. Her reputation is intact, because she did nothing wrong," Beatrice said fiercely. "And we're going to prove it. Benedick, you know Claudio best. Where would he go right now? Back to the guest house, probably. Or the library where he thinks he saw—" Benedick stopped, his eyes widening. "The library. If this happened in study room 304, there might be evidence. Security footage from the hallway cameras, sign-in logs, something." "The library keeps digital records of room reservations," Hero said softly, finding her voice. "Every study room has to be booked through the online system. If someone was in that room, there's a record." Beatrice stood decisively. "Then that's where we start. Uncle Leo, you stay with Hero. Benedick, come with me." "Beatrice," Leonardo began. "No," she said firmly. "Hero is my family. Someone hurt her, lied about her, tried to destroy her happiness. I'm going to find out who and make them pay for it. Are you with me, Professor Montague?" Benedick looked at her, this fierce, brilliant woman who refused to accept injustice, and felt something final click into place in his heart. "Always," he said simply. They left together, moving with purpose into the night, while behind them Hero wept quietly, and Leonardo held his daughter, whispering promises that everything would be all right, praying he wasn't lying. The library at midnight was a different creature than during daylight hours. Emergency lighting cast long shadows through the stacks, and their footsteps echoed on the marble floors as Beatrice and Benedick made their way to the security office in the basement. Beatrice had called ahead, waking the night security supervisor with the kind of authoritative urgency that made people cooperate without questioning. Marcus Chen, the head of campus security, met them at his office door, a tired-looking man in his 50s with graying hair and the patient demeanor of someone who'd seen every kind of student prank and faculty drama imaginable. "Miss Leonato, Professor Montague, you said this was urgent? We need to see the security footage from the 3rd floor, west corridor from last night," Beatrice said without preamble. "Between 8 and 10 p.m., specifically around study room 304. Marcus gestured them into his office, a cramped space dominated by multiple monitors showing camera feeds from across campus. He settled into his chair and began typing, pulling up archived footage. The 3rd floor cameras cover the main corridor. Study room 304 is visible from camera 12. His fingers flew across the keyboard. "What exactly are we looking for?" "Proof of a setup," Benedick said, leaning over Marcus's shoulder to watch the screen. "Someone used that room last night to stage something that would be seen through the window. We need to know who booked it, who was in it, and what actually happened." The footage loaded, black and white and grainy but clear enough. The timestamp read 8:47 p.m. The corridor was empty, the fluorescent lights harsh on the video. They watched in silence as the minutes ticked by. Then, at 8:52, a figure appeared. A young woman with dark hair wearing jeans and a hoodie, carrying a backpack. She moved quickly, purposefully, letting herself into room 304 with a keycard. "Can you zoom in on her face?" Beatrice asked. Marcus enhanced the image. The resolution wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough. "That's not Hero," Beatrice said with relief flooding her voice. "The face is completely different. Similar build, similar hair, but not her." "Keep watching," Benedick said, his voice tight. 2 minutes later, another figure appeared. A man, also in jeans and a dark jacket, his face partially obscured by a baseball cap. He looked directly at the camera for just a moment before entering the room, and Benedick cursed under his breath. Borracchio, Don John's assistant. Inside the office they could see through the door's window. Barely, the angle was poor, but enough to see the woman remove her hoodie, revealing a cream-colored sweater underneath. She pulled off a wig cap and shook out a long, dark wig, transforming herself into someone who could, from a distance and through a narrow window, pass for Hero Rossetti. "It's a complete setup," Marcus said, his professional interest piqued. "Elaborate one, too. They knew exactly where the cameras were, what angles would and wouldn't be visible." "Can you check the room reservation system?" Beatrice asked. "Who booked that room?" Marcus pulled up another screen, navigating to the library's database. "Study room 304, October 25th, 8 to 10 p.m. Reserved under the name..." He paused, his eyebrows rising. "Margaret Doyle." Beatrice's blood ran cold. "My assistant. But she would never..." "Someone used her credentials," Benedick said quickly. "Who has access to the reservation system?" "Anyone with a university login," Marcus replied. "But the system logs IP addresses. Let me check where this reservation was made from." More typing. "Campus Computer Lab, Station 17, October 24th at 3:15 p.m. "The computer labs don't require login to use individual stations," Beatrice said, thinking fast. "Anyone could have used it, but they would have needed Margaret's password to access her account. Or a keylogger, or social engineering, or any number of ways to steal credentials," Benedick added grimly. He turned back to Marcus. "Can you keep watching the footage? We need to see what happened next." They watched as, on screen, Borracchio positioned himself, with his back to the door's window. The woman, the fake hero, sat on the desk in what was clearly a staged pose. They went through the motions of an intimate encounter, carefully choreographed to be visible through the narrow window, while keeping the woman's face mostly obscured. At 9:03 p.m. the door opened. They couldn't see who entered. The camera angle didn't catch it, but they saw Borracchio and the woman freeze, hold the pose for exactly 15 seconds, then separate. "That's when Claudio was there," Benedick said, his voice hollow. They held the tableau just long enough for him to see what they wanted him to see. After another minute, both Borracchio and the woman left the room, moving quickly in opposite directions. The woman pulled her hoodie back on, stuffed the wig into her backpack, and disappeared toward the back stairwell. Borracchio went the other direction, toward the main elevators. "Do we have footage of the building entrance?" Beatrice asked. "Can we see who the woman was?" Marcus shook his head. The west entrance camera has been broken for 2 weeks. Maintenance keeps saying they'll fix it, but you know how it is with budget cuts. Convenient, Benedick muttered. Don John would have known that. He probably scoped out the entire building before planning this. This is enough, Beatrice said, her voice hard with determination. This footage proves Hero was framed. We need to show it to Claudio, to the dean, to everyone who was at that dinner. Wait, Marcus said, still typing. There's something else. The system flagged unusual activity on Baracchio's employee account. Let me pull up his email records. With probable cause for investigation, I'm authorized to access them in cases of suspected criminal activity. He navigated through security protocols, pulling up archived emails. Here. Sent from Baracchio to Don John yesterday at 7:30 p.m. Package delivered. Subject in position. Client observed product as promised. Payment due. Marcus looked up at them. This was a paid job. Someone hired them to do this. Don John paid Baracchio, Benedick said. It has to be. This whole thing was his revenge scheme. But we need proof of that, Beatrice said. The video shows Baracchio and an unknown woman staging a scene, but it doesn't directly connect to Don John ordering it. A good lawyer could argue Baracchio was acting independently. Marcus continued scrolling through the email records. There's more here. Earlier emails between them discussing the Hero project, logistics, timing, and he stopped, his expression darkening. An email from 3 days ago with an attachment. It's a photograph, candid shot of Hero in that cream sweater. Someone was stalking her, documenting what she wore. Beatrice felt sick. This was so calculated, every detail planned. But it's still circumstantial without Don John's direct involvement, Benedick said, frustrated. We need a confession or something that explicitly ties him to the conspiracy. Then we get a confession, Beatrice said simply. Marcus, can you make copies of all this? The video footage, the emails, everything. Already on it. Marcus was burning files to a disk, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency. I'm also filing a formal security incident report. This goes beyond academic misconduct into potential criminal harassment, identity fraud, and defamation. The university will have to investigate, and likely the local police as well. Benedick checked his watch. It's almost 1 a.m. Where would Don John be right now? The guest house, Beatrice said. Where else? He thinks he's gotten away with it. He's probably sleeping soundly while Hero's life falls apart. Marcus handed Beatrice the disc in a protective case. Everything's on here. Time-stamped, authenticated, chain of custody documented. This will hold up in any proceeding, academic or legal. Thank you, Beatrice said, taking the disc like it was made of gold. You may have just saved my cousin's life, or at least her future. They left the security office and emerged into the cold night air. The campus was silent, most buildings dark except for scattered windows where insomniacs studied or faculty worked late. Beatrice and Benedick walked side by side toward the guest house, neither speaking, both processing the weight of what they'd discovered. Finally, Benedick broke the silence. You were magnificent in there. The way you commanded the situation, knew exactly what to ask for, connected the pieces. I'm an event coordinator, Beatrice said, but there was no bite in it. I'm good at logistics and problem solving. This was just another problem to solve. No, Benedick said, stopping and turning to face her. This was you refusing to let someone you love be hurt. This was you being fierce and loyal and absolutely brilliant, and He paused, the words catching in his throat. I need to tell you something. The other day in the gardens, I overheard Pedro and Leonardo talking. About you. About how you supposedly felt about me. Beatrice's eyes widened, her heart suddenly racing. Oh, and Margaret told me you'd overheard something similar about me. From Hero. Oh, Beatrice said again, a flush rising to her cheeks even in the darkness. They were meddling, trying to trick us into admitting feelings they thought we had. Benedick took a step closer to her. The thing is, they weren't wrong. Or maybe they were and they accidentally created something true. I don't know any more, Beatrice. All I know is that standing here with you, fighting for something that matters, I can't imagine wanting to be anywhere else or with anyone else. Beatrice looked up at him, her brilliant mind for once struggling to find words. I've spent years telling myself I didn't need anyone. That love was a distraction from real work, real purpose. And then you came back and reminded me that arguing with you is the most alive I ever feel, that matching wits with you is better than any accomplishment on my calendar. So what do we do about it? Benedick asked softly. I don't know, Beatrice admitted. I'm terrified. You terrify me. The way you make me feel terrifies me. Good, Benedick said and smiled, not his usual sardonic smirk, but something genuine and warm and vulnerable. I'm terrified too. Maybe we can be terrified together. Beatrice felt herself smiling back, felt years of defensive armor cracking and falling away. After we clear Hero's name and destroy Don John's life, remind me to kiss you. I'm going to hold you to that, Benedick said, and there was promise in his voice. They resumed walking toward the guest house, but now their hands found each other in the darkness, fingers intertwining with surprising ease, as if they'd been meant to fit together all along. The presidential guest house stood quiet in the early morning darkness, its windows mostly dark except for a single light burning on the second floor. Beatrice and Benedick stood at the entrance, the disc of evidence clutched in Beatrice's hand, steeling themselves for confrontation. But before they could ring the bell, the front door opened. Claudio stood there, still wearing his suit from the dinner but disheveled, his tie gone, his face ravaged by sleeplessness and grief. He looked at them with hollow eyes. I can't sleep, he said, his voice raw. I keep seeing her face when she collapsed. The confusion, the pain. And part of me keeps whispering that I'm wrong, that I made a terrible mistake. But I saw. You saw a lie, Benedick said firmly. Claudio, we have proof. Video evidence. Come with us. Right now. Something flickered in Claudio's expression. Hope warring with fear of more disappointment. What are you talking about? Beatrice held up the disc. Security footage from the library. The woman you saw wasn't Hero. It was an actress hired by Baracchio, probably paid by Don John. They staged the entire thing knowing you'd be there to witness it. You were set up, and Hero was framed. Claudio stared at the disc like it was both salvation and accusation. But I saw her. The sweater, the hair, a wig and costume, Benedick said. They documented what Hero wore, recreated it precisely. The lighting was poor, the viewing angle limited, and Don John had already primed you to expect betrayal. You saw what they wanted you to see. Where is she? Claudio whispered. Hero, is she? Devastated, Beatrice said coldly, humiliated in front of the entire faculty. Accused of infidelity when her only crime was falling in love with someone who didn't trust her enough to ask questions before destroying her publicly. Claudio flinched as if struck. I have to see her. I have to apologize. Explain. Not yet, Benedick said, his hand on his friend's shoulder. First we deal with Don John. He needs to face what he's done. As if summoned by his name, Don John appeared at the top of the staircase, wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt, his expression shifting from sleepy confusion to wary calculation as he took in the scene. What's going on? Claudio, why are you talking to them? Come down here, Beatrice said, her voice carrying the full weight of her fury. We know everything. The stage scene, Baracchio's involvement, the emails planning, the Hero project. It's all documented, time-stamped, and currently being reviewed by campus security and the dean. Don John descended the stairs slowly, his mind visibly working through options and finding none. I don't know what you're talking about. Study room 304, Benedick said. A woman in a wig, Baracchio playing the male lead, a carefully choreographed scene designed to destroy an innocent person's reputation. Does it sound familiar now? For a long moment Don John said nothing. Then, slowly, a bitter smile crossed his face. So you figured it out. Impressive detective work. I underestimated you both. Why? Claudio's voice broke. Hero never hurt you. I never hurt you. Why would you do this? Because you have everything, Don John said, and now the bitterness poured out unchecked. You walk back onto this campus after 3 years away, and immediately you're celebrated, welcomed, given prestigious positions and respect. Meanwhile, I'm here on sufferance, tolerated but never forgiven. forced to smile and bow to people who wouldn't spit on me if I were on fire. So you decided to make me as miserable as you are, Claudio said quietly. I decided to show this smug institution that their precious innocence was an illusion, that their perfect dean's daughter could be destroyed as easily as I was. That reputation is just a story people tell, and stories can be rewritten. Don John's smile turned cruel. And I succeeded. Everyone who was at that dinner will remember Hero Rossetti's public shaming for the rest of their lives. Actually, came a new voice from the doorway, they'll remember something very different. Leonardo stepped inside, and behind him came Pedro, Margaret, and Hero herself. She was pale but composed, dressed simply in jeans and a sweater, her father's arm supporting her. When Claudio saw her, he made a wounded sound and moved toward her, but Benedick held him back. They'll remember, Leonardo continued, his voice cold with controlled rage, how a bitter expelled student orchestrated an elaborate fraud to damage my daughter's reputation. They'll remember the security footage proving her complete innocence. And they'll remember that Don John Prince was arrested for harassment, fraud, conspiracy, and defamation. He nodded to the doorway where 2 campus police officers now stood. Officers, he's all yours. Don John's face went white. You can't. I have rights. You have the right to remain silent, one officer said, producing handcuffs. You have the right to an attorney. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As they led him away, Don John looked back at Claudio with something like satisfaction. I still won. I still made you doubt her. You showed everyone exactly what kind of man you are. The kind who jumps to conclusions, who destroys first and asks questions later. Even if she forgives you, you'll always know that about yourself. Then he was gone, and silence fell over the guest house entrance. Claudio finally broke free from Benedick's restraining hand and approached Hero, falling to his knees before her. I'm so sorry, he whispered, tears streaming down his face. I'm so sorry. There's no excuse, no justification. I should have trusted you, should have asked, should have given you the benefit of any doubt. Instead, I believed the worst, and I hurt you in the worst possible way. Hero looked down at him, her own eyes wet. You broke my heart, I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn your forgiveness, even though I don't deserve it.